Welcome back to On the Middle East, our flagship podcast on the biggest stories of the day. My name is Amran Zaman, and today I'll be discussing the alarming spike in tensions between two top US allies, Turkey and Israel. Worries of a clash grew on Tuesday when Israel struck a Syrian military airport close to the Turkish border. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said Turkey was planning a military deployment to the airport, and that is why it was struck. The sides have since been trading accusations over who was responsible for igniting the affair. Relations between Turkey and Israel have been steadily deteriorating over Israel's assaults on Gaza and the West Bank and Turkey's support for Hamas. The rise to power in Syria of Ahmed al-Shara, a former jihadist and a close Turkish ally, has added a fresh layer of hostility. Israel is determined to keep Shara weak and to prevent further Turkish military expansion in Syria. Meanwhile, Israel's close ties with Greece and Cyprus has also placed it at odds with Ankara in the eastern Mediterranean. The two countries are also at loggerheads in the Horn of Africa, where Israel and the United Arab Emirates are wary of Turkey's deepening presence. With us here to discuss these issues is Danny Citrinowicz, a senior fellow at the Israeli Institute for Strategic Studies and a non-resident fellow at the Atlantic Council. Welcome to our program, Danny. It's great to have you.
Thank you for inviting me.
So we're all familiar with the arguments about why there is this escalating tension between Israel and Turkey. We talk about, Gaza, Hamas, competition in the East Med, Horn of Africa, domestic politics. All of these things have been laid before us, but do you think there are other aspects to this increasing escalation that have not been put forward yet?
Yeah, again, thank you for inviting me for this important podcast. And I'll add Syria as another element of or point of friction. And I would say in general terms that, looking back at the history of the relations between Turkey and Israel, of course, it was in the past, it was a very strong cooperation and relationship. Everything, economy, security, intel, and of course, things changed dramatically. But people tend to forget that just before the 7th of October, Netanyahu met with Erdogan in the United Nations. So even if that we had, until the 7th of October, we had the deterioration of the relationship, the Marmara and other elements that happened actually deteriorate the situation, both countries still preserved the relationship, diplomatic one, economical one. Now, 7th of October definitely changed the situation, not only because of Erdogan's support, Turkey's support to Hamas, but also from the change of the Israeli doctrine in a way that we're not going to wait to that enemies will have or will purchase high-end capabilities that will hurt us, like Hezbollah did, like Hamas did, and we're going to attack them before they will have the ability to rebuild this capability. Even more than that, I think that this is another important element, that from the Israeli perspective, any development in the Middle East, first and foremost perceived as a threat to Israel. Nothing is opportunity, everything is a threat. So when you have Pakistan, Turkey, and Saudi Arabia working together, it's against Israel. When you have visits between Sisi and Erdogan, it's against Israel. So everything is becoming against Israel. So when you wrap it up, you understand that the deterioration in the relationship occurred because of 7th of October, occurred because of Hamas, adding up to everything that you said, the Horn of Africa, what's happening in Syria, probably discuss that. But basically, it's also connected to the change in Israeli doctrine that nobody will threaten us, will attack any threat that is building against us. And for the Israeli decision maker, anything that's happening or alliances in the Middle East, it's bound to be against Israel and Israel's security.
So there was no parallel track of trying to build relationships and alliances in tandem with that proactive deterrence policy. It was just one. Okay, so do you think that was a mistake?
Definitely it was a mistake. Look, we are shifting from one end to the other. By the way, after 7th of October, there were some activities to rebuild some sort of deconfliction mechanism between Turkey and Israel. Of course, we have a common ally, Azerbaijan, that can actually create that glue. But basically, the gaps are too big to handle right now. I think it's a mistake because in general terms, a country cannot live for one end to the other hand. Yes, we cannot have this containment that allowing enemies to rebuild the capacity. But on the other hand, we find ourselves in endless war, 1,000 days of endless war. It's eroding our economy, our society, our security capabilities. Yes, we are strong, but I think these wars are not strengthening us. They are weakening us internally. And of course, look at the legitimacy of Israel international community, how we are perceived in the US, in Europe, in the Middle East. So yes, it's a problem. We have to make this readjustment, not return back to full containment, but not attacking everywhere that we can. The Qatar issue and the Syrian issue, I think it's highlighted the fact that this is a problem, that we are adopting a policy that make countries think that we are actually undermining the stability in the region. So definitely it's a mistake, and I hope that the future government in Israel will rethink about its policy. Again, we have to make the adjustment. I don't think there will be dramatic changes, unfortunately, but also in terms of Turkey, it's important to say that Turkey is maybe it's an adversary of Israel right now, but we have to adopt a policy that's not turning it to an enemy. We don't want to find ourselves in a war against Turkey. We still have a lot in common. We have the U.S. working with Turkey. We are working with the U.S. We still have, economical relations. We still have things that we can build on. And I think the problem is that taking the Israeli doctrine on the 7th of October, and of course, the rigid ideology coming from Turkey against Israel after what happened in Gaza, those are problematic things that can lead us to escalation. I think that we have to stop and rethink our policy to prevent that from happening.
Well, you mentioned Syria, and that's where things seem to be getting hotter and hotter. And we just saw the Israeli airstrike on that base in Idlib, where Turkish forces were apparently getting ready to move in. They say they were sort of rebuilding it, but who knows? Clearly, Turkey has an interest in expanding its military footprint in Syria. And so, I mean, we all keep saying this can't happen. The United States won't allow it to happen. But in fact, in your view, can there be some kind of real confrontation? And what are the guardrails against that, given how erratic this Trump administration is?
Well, Maureen, it's a very important question, because if you ask where Israel and Turkey will clash, it probably will be in Syria. Now, the gap between Israel and Turkey regarding Syria is not only in terms of Turkey's support to Syria. The Turks want to see a strong Ahmad al-Shara in Syria. Israel wants to see a weakened Ahmad al-Shara in Syria. This is the main gap. So any help to strengthen Ahmad al-Shara in Syria will be perceived in Israel as a threat to its interest. So this is the gap that we are creating. And while this gap is happening, then and given the fact that Israel won't able to block it forever, then definitely friction can occur. It can occur in the air when Israel is attacking Syria. It can occur on the ground if the Turks will decide to enter their own troops to Syria to help Ahmad al-Shara. So I think definitely Syria is the place, unfortunately, together with the East Med, as 2 points of clash between Israel and Turkey. The best way to prevent that from happening is the confliction mechanism that will have Israelis sitting together with the Turks, understanding the red lines of each side regarding Turkey, and of course Israel is strengthening relations with Ahmad al-Shara. I think that despite his past, at the end of the day, we all know that there is the biggest threat to the Iranian presence in the region is Ahmad al-Shara, that preventing the buildup of a ground line between Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon, thus helping Hezbollah or preventing Hezbollah from arming its capabilities. So yes, we have things to discuss with the Shah. We need to strengthen him. Strengthening Mashal will strengthen the Israeli relations with Saudi Arabia that have a vast interest in strengthening Ahmad al-Shara. So definitely things need to be changed. But for now, I have to say I'm very skeptical. Without a deconfliction mechanism, and while Turkey wants to strengthen Ahmad al-Shara, I suspect that some sort of a clash between us and Turkey over Syria is only a matter of time. The best way to prevent that is the U.S. getting involved, Barak, the ambassador, getting involved, big in the confliction mechanism that will prevent that from happening. From the tactical standpoint, that Israel is flying near Turkey, and then we're gonna alert the Turkey that this is happening. So the strategic way of thinking, meaning that we all think how we're gonna intervene in a way in the future in Syria regarding Israel and Turkey. I think that is crucial. Without doing that, I suspect that escalation is, I want to say, imminent or inevitable, but the chances for that are extremely high.
That's extremely alarming. This is the first time I've heard it put quite so starkly. And you say that Turkey wants a strong Shura, but it's not just Turkey, it's the United States that wants a strong
Yeah.
Shura, and it's Europe because they want a stable Syria, for their own respective reasons. Certainly for Europe, they don't want more Syrian refugees coming in. And of course, the United States doesn't want to see Iran come back. But I mean, given that this US administration has proven pretty hopeless at quite a few things, do you see a role for the Russians here in terms of
I just want to, yeah.
conflicting?
Before, it's an important question, but I just want to touch a little bit about the U.S. issue. I think U.S. is almost, I think they gave up Netanyahu. You see Trump doesn't support him publicly. And even more than that, I think there is a lot of anger in Washington against everything that Israel is doing, pushing them, trying to push them back to war against Iran, the Gaza issue, Syria, Lebanon. And I think this is something that's very problematic for Israel because we don't want to find ourselves in a friction with the biggest ally that we have. So this is something that we have to pay a closer look because I think the recent attacks in Syria and attacks in Gaza, this is not something that the U.S. supports. And I think it creates a friction between us and Washington and not a good thing for Israel. In terms for Russia, and again, it's interesting because definitely Israel still preserves good relations with Moscow. Netanyahu has good relations with Putin. And now we have a renewed relations between Shara and Putin. And of course, there are relations between going back and forth between Russia and Turkey. But I still suspect that that Israel will not prioritize Russian mediation. I think we're still going to prioritize American mediation over everything because, again, there is a lot of skepticism in Israel regarding Ambassador Barak, but I still think it's better working with Washington and Moscow in that regard. One other element I need to add is just, again, to relate to what you said. Israel is more or less isolated in its approach towards Syria. Even the UAE that were very skeptical regarding Ashara strengthened their relation with them because they all want to see, like you said, thriving Syria, strong Syria, allowing refugees to return back, and even more than that, preventing Iran from consolidating its activities in Syria, sorry. The problem is that Israel doesn't see, I think Israel is prioritizing now helping the Druze and other minorities in maybe the Kurds in Syria. And this is a policy that is really counterproductive because I think it's not only against anything that the world wants, but even more than that, I don't think that a mayhem in Syria will serve our interests. I think that also for the Israeli strategic future, I think it's better to have strong relations with a strong Syria like we have today. The recent report said that the head of the Mossad talked to Shibani, the former minister of Syrian foreign minister. It's a unique development, but we have to preserve that. We cannot preserve that while attacking Syria, while not helping Shara to build its capabilities. So in that regard, I agree with you that it's something that the world wants. Israel is against that. It's a problem for Israel, like everything else in terms of Lebanon, Gaza, Iran, whatever. But I think that, returning back to the question, Israel will always prioritize American coordination than the Russian one.
As will Turkey, I suspect, and Syria itself. However, one of the reasons we mentioned for this escalation is domestic politics, the forthcoming elections in Israel. Do you believe that the risk is that much greater because of perhaps Netanyahu's need to create a crisis at this time? Is that one element? And the second question is, if Mr. Eisenkot or another, opposition figure comes to power, can we see a reversal of this escalation trend?
Again, two important questions. First, for the first question, according to polls in Israel, majority of people in Israel suspect that Netanyahu is embedding political considerations in his security policy. So the question is, yes, there is a possibility that in order to change or to improve its situation in the polls, that Netanyahu will prefer to do I don't want to start a war, but he can make actions to increase the tension in the region that might help him politically, because thus it will strengthen his military or security posture, like happening now in Turkey. Like he said, I told Erdogan, I'm going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to allow you, whatever. So it allows him also to play the security card. It's better for him than the domestic one, because domestically the situation in Israel is very complex, economically and other elements. So definitely it's something that not me saying, the Israeli public saying we need to consider it. In second, regarding Eisenkot, in general terms, we have to say that we have to be very cautious in how we're going to assume that what will happen in the future government. Assuming that Netanyahu will lose and will have Eisenkot or Bennett or Lieberman, I don't think we'll see a dramatic change in terms of the foreign policy of Israel. This is, I say, it's an unfortunate event, but I don't think it will happen. I think that they will invest a lot of time domestically with the ultra-Orthodox and everything in relations to the recruitment to the army. But in terms of no Palestinian state, yes, we'll try to enhance our cooperation with the Gulf states, but it won't happen if nothing will move on the Palestinian side. Maybe we'll see things more positive in West Bank, again, maybe in terms of stopping the annexation process. But I don't think we'll withdraw anytime soon from Syria or from Lebanon. In terms of Turkey, I hope that logic will prevail. I really hope. I think we'll have a better decision-making process than this government. And maybe we'll see an outreach in terms of maybe building a deconfliction mechanism. I think that might happen because I'm hoping that the next government is not a favorite of using kinetics and continuing the 1,000 days war that we have. They're not going to change dramatically the policy, but they're going to change the tone, I think. Definitely trying to enhance the cooperation. Again, I think that it's hopeless without changing the Israeli policy regarding Palestinians. But in terms of the Turks, I think the logic will prevail. For example, we just heard Yair Golan, that is going to be a minister in the future government. I don't know which one. And he said attacking Syria was a mistake. We need to deconflict politically, diplomatically with the Turks. So I think, again, Bennett is, of course, against that, saying that Turkey is an enemy, like Qatar, whatever, but he's saying a lot, but I'm not sure he's going to implement what he's saying. But I think you'll have more reasonable voices within Israeli leadership, unlike our defense minister today and others, that will try to interact. So I'm quite optimistic on that, quite pessimistic on the fact that we'll see a dramatic change in the Israeli policy after the elections.
Yeah, but I mean, even with that policy, there was still some semblance of normalcy in the relationship between Turkey and Israel. That was something that both sides could manage, whereas now it's, as you say, beginning to look unmanageable. So let's hope that at least on that front things change. But at the same time, in parallel, we see also Israel, really alienating countries like Saudi Arabia, with which it might have had better relations. There was this idea that somehow Saudi Arabia could possibly join the Abraham Accords. Of course, Gaza, Palestine is a very, very big issue, but now we're seeing Saudi Arabia come together with Turkey, Pakistan, potentially Egypt. So there are these defense alliances that are now forming. How do you evaluate this development of this Mecca Pact? And how does it sit with the UAE, Israel, Greece, Cyprus, so-called, alliance?
Yeah, again, I'll be very realistic and say that again, I like majority of voices in Israel. The Mecca Pact is not against Israel. It was driven from the fact that the Saudis need to enhance the deterrence they have after the war against Iran. They suffered from Iran. Now they're suffering from the Houthis, and they want to improve their capabilities, their deterrence capabilities, and this is why they had this pact with Pakistan and now with Turkey. It's not a Sunni axis against Israel. It's not. It's first and foremost for the Saudis. This is one. Second, it's not a Muslim NATO. We saw not Qatar, not Egypt joining that. It's not. It's definitely strengthening Saudi Arabia, again, with limitations, strengthening Pakistani deterrence regarding India, and strengthening Turkey footprint in the region. But at the end of the day, it's not something dramatic in the way that the new threat regarding Israel, despite what people think in Israel. Regarding Saudi Arabia, I have to say that if Israel will move forward on the Palestinian track, you will see Saudi reciprocation, meaning that they will be willing to move forward, even with the pacts with Turkey, with Pakistan, whatever. I think FBA definitely basically wants to have these relations enhanced, but without moving forward on the Palestinian track, nothing will move. So that's another element. Now, the other part regarding Israel, that we have no ability to build a counter axis. India, with all due respect, strategic relations with Israel, but also strategic relations with Iran. They are a country that historically they don't have alliances. So no India in the alliance. The UAE, definitely strong relation with Israel. When Netanyahu visited there, they denied he was there. So also there are limitations to that. Hellenic country, important in terms of, same notion, countering Turkey and all those things. But again, if we find ourselves in a clash with Turkey, what will help us, this kind of Hellenic alliance? I'm not saying we need to stop. I think those relations are important, Cyprus, Greece. But if someone thinks that it's something that will able to build against Turkey, I think it's a mistake. I think we don't need to put all the eggs in the same basket, meaning we have to interact with them, working with them, but still have the deconfliction mechanism with Turkey. We can do both. Again, I'm not thinking that tomorrow we'll have renewed full diplomatic relations with Ankara. I know it's going to be very hard. And until something dramatic will move on the positive side on Gaza, it won't happen. But we have to prevent things from deteriorating. So I'm not working with the Hellenic countries is important, and strengthening our security relations with India is important, but it's not replacement to the need to create a deconfliction mechanism with Ankara. And unfortunately, we are, for now, it's looking that we're putting all the eggs in the same basket. But unfortunately, as I mentioned, it's not going to prevent any future escalation, unnecessary escalation with Turkey. This is where we are right now. And again, not every development in the Middle East is against Israel. And we have to remember that. And if Israel will do positive things on the Palestinian track, we'll see positive things coming from Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia, and others. The problem is that, again, the policy has changed dramatically, and I don't think that the future government will change it. We got a Palestinian that, after the 7th of October, the lesson in Israel we need to strengthen the moderate and weaken the extremists. But unfortunately, we are continuing to weaken the moderates, the Palestinian Authority, and still having the extremists, Hamas, still in Gaza. So I'm very frustrated from that, thinking that we have to change that mentality. Without that, no integration in the region, no normalization with Saudi Arabia, and probably escalation with Turkey, unfortunately.
One senses, though, from your social media commentary that you're also quite frustrated with the Trump administration's handling of the conflict with Iran. So when we place this Israeli-Turkish tensions against the background within the broader context of this conflict, and given the fact that there is a growing risk, as you often say, of, a new escalation, how does that, what effects can that have on Turkey, Israel, if indeed the war reignites and grows?
Yeah. So first, I'm frustrated not from the administration in general. I had the utmost respect for the support of Israel. I frustrated from the fact that they don't know Iran and they're adopting a wrong policy that will lead escalation and not de-escalation, unfortunately. Now, in terms of Iran, Turkey, Israel, I have to say that Israel and Turkey has the same interest of seeing a weakened Iran. Nobody wants to see the Islamic Republic of Iran strong. But unlike Israel, Turkey do not want to see the collapse of the regime, because then you have the Kurds issue, then you have refugees, then we have stronger Israel because Iran is countering a little bit Israel force in the region. So we can work on weakening Iran, but we're not seeing eye to eye on the need to undermine the regime or top of the regime in Iran. Because I'm saying that because if we turn back to war against Iran, and we're going to be, again, attacking infrastructure and other elements within Iran itself, Turkey will not support that. On the contrary, Turkey will be definitely against it. And again, we can find ourselves in some sort of friction with Turkey, because Turkey will be afraid from the implications of Israel activity in Iran against it. And they will pressure the US to stop it as well. So I think that renewed war between Iran and Israel will be another element that will create a lot of problems in relations between Turkey and Israel. Again, I have to say we can work on weakening the regime, but the line drops when you're talking about toppling the regime. And a renewed war will be a problematic thing for Israel-Turkey relations, but also Israel relations with other countries, unfortunately.
Well, of course, that brings us to the Kurds, which is my final question. A lot of Kurdish people ask me, how serious is Israel about supporting us? So I'm going to ask you the same question. How serious is Israel about supporting the Kurds?
Well, I think Israel definitely, historically wants to support the Kurds. And for Israel, it's a way of finding friends within a very problematic region. So definitely we're supporting the Kurds. And of course, for us, it can be also something that will be against the Turkey in a way, because it's countering the Turkish influence in the region. So definitely Israel wants to support the Kurds. And it's not something going to vanish anytime soon. It's really, historically, Israel adopted its policy. Now, having said that, we saw what happened against in the war between Israel and Iran, that Israel, tried to support the Kurds, using them as some sort of a boots on the ground, and Israel actually forgo that. So there are limitations to this alliance, to say that. Basically, yes, Israel is interested in supporting the Kurds, but I think now Israel really understands the glass ceiling of using the Kurds to change the regime in Iran. So it's not going to change in the future in terms of these kind of alliances going way back historically, but I think that we have to put things in perspective. It's not going to change the Middle East, unfortunately.
Well, Danny, I'm from Turkey, and I really hope that things get better between our two countries, because you have a great country and hopefully they will. Thanks so much for joining us here today. And
thank you.
We love your work. Thank you, Danny.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Danny, and for more on Turkey's fraught ties with Israel and the rest of the region, go to our website www.al-monitor.com. Thank you and goodbye.